And I don't need the transcript. Go away. Okay, so it's recording now. So we're now into week 3. And David, I know you'd sent me an email. I had one other person that sent me an email about 2-3. And since everybody has their homework turned in, I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start off the class this time, and we'll go back and we'll look at exercise 2-3. And you're not, trust me, you're not the only one that's had trouble with this. I pretty much have people having trouble with this all the time, every class period or every semester. So we're just going to work through this, okay? Let me share this. All right, can you guys see that spreadsheet?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, so accounting for materials, gear packs, manufacturers, backpacks. Okay, and the plant records include the following material-related transactions. Okay, so they purchased canvas for $75,000, and they purchased thread for $14,000. Okay, so I think I actually typed everything from the book in this one. So I don't think we need to open the book and look at it. But so one of the first things we need to look at, what were we looking at this last week? What was the big things we were looking at? We were looking at, is it a direct material or is it an indirect material, right? So if we're making backpacks, looks like these backpacks are made out of canvas, okay? So if I've purchased material, these two items are going to go together in my material inventory, right? Because I've purchased the material. So if I've purchased this, what do you think my entry is going to be for my debit?
76,400.
Okay. And again, making sure that and this isn't necessarily just for your guys' benefit, but for everybody's, making sure that we show our homework so Professor Dave can give you some partial credit if you get the problem wrong. Okay, so we're going to come here and we're going to say this equals this plus this for $76,400. Okay, now remember, this is a journal. It says it's a journal entry. So if we've got 76,400 that came into where do we need to put a credit? Well, in fact, this already gives you got accounts payable. So we got to pay for that, right? So how much is going to have to go over here on the right side?
76,400.
The same amount, right? Okay, did I not click in it? No, I don't have my number lock on. There we go. And you could have just said this equals this to keep a formula in there, but there's no math being done, so it's 76,400. Okay, so to record the purchase of materials, boom, we did that. Okay, so now to record the use of materials, okay, our work in progress inventory. Okay, let me get the book out because apparently I didn't get it all typed in there. Remember, I said too, if you go to do these problems, sometimes you got to go back to the book and make sure that I typed all the information in.
I looked in the book and I didn't see anything different.
Yeah, let me get to the end of chapter 2. So yeah, it's there. I just wasn't looking. Okay. So material requisitions. Remember what I said requisition was? That's if you're running a warehouse and somebody needs canvas or somebody needs thread, they're going to come to you with a slip of paper and requisition a certain amount of stuff out of your warehouse, right? And the reason you have that piece of paper is because if you're going to give some out, you got to have a piece of paper that says how much you gave out so that you got your balances. Okay? So canvas is a direct material, right? So where did we say direct materials were going to go? Think back to the T charts. Huh?
Work in progress?
It's going to go to our work in progress inventory, right? So we're going to put 6,300 in there. And again, you can say this equals this, okay? And for overhead, we're going to count this $450 worth of thread, okay? And the reason for that is somebody may have come to me, let's say they're big spools of thread, and they're $45 a spool, and somebody came in and requisitioned 10 of them, okay? And the only reason they requisitioned 10 of them is because they had 10 empty spots on their machines. But the reason we're calling it an indirect material is it kind of goes back to the same stuff we did last week, where we're talking about glue and nails and stain. Thread is something that we're going to get on a big bolt, and you're not going to use one spool of thread for one backpack.
Wouldn't that go to the canvas too, though? Because it would come on a big spool, not individually cut out for each backpack.
Well, not necessarily. You could get the canvas cut into, pre-done sizes that could set down on a plate that has a thing that comes down and cuts a template that comes down and cuts all the pieces out. Okay. Specifically, we're making canvas backpacks, so just follow the logic there. Okay. So remember, you got to remember too, what were we talking about in class? Okay. So what we were talking about was trying to distinguish the difference between work in progress inventory and manufacturing overhead. And here we're specifically talking about these journal accounts. So we're going to put this 450 here. Okay. So our material inventory, how much is going here?
The difference between the purchase of canvas and the materials requisition canvas?
Okay, that would be an ending inventory that's still up here in our warehouse, right?
Mm-hmm.
For this job, our material inventory, how much? So remember,
it should be the
balance. We put this much into work in progress. So remember, if we put this much into material inventory, we had to put this much into accounts payable. Okay, so if we're putting this much into the process of making them, the material inventory. You remember those sheets that I was talking about, the requisition sheets? Okay, so they're going to have a couple of requisition sheets that's going to equal this value. Okay, just remember when you're doing journals, the left side and the right side have to balance. Now, you may have, in this case, we had one entry and one entry. Okay, in this case, we got two entries and one entry. You could have 25 entries in one entry, because you may have taken 25 different things out of the inventory, out of the raw material inventory in order to be making stuff. You're tracking with me there?
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be equal numbers of items. It has to be equal values of items. Okay? So this is just simply going to equal this plus this for our material inventory. And okay, I did that. I started saying I didn't do that right, but I did. So you see how this is material that came in, and we got to pay for it. Accounts payable. What happened to accounts payable that was in there? Oh, when I didn't have my number lock on a while ago. I was messing that up. So we have our material inventory. We purchased this much, so accounts payable has to have a corresponding balance. Our stuff that we took out of our material inventory to put into our work in progress, some of it direct material, some of it indirect material, but these two have to balance so that the material inventory has a credit for what we took out of them. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the next step then is we had to post these transactions on a material inventory account, okay, which is this here. Now, I think I told you guys this. If not, my apologies. But as you work this chart out, you're actually the answer for number 3. What's your ending balance inventory? If you work this chart out right, it's going to be right there. Okay, so you can actually take that number and bring it down here, or I usually just tell everybody, say, see number 2, because the answer's up here. Okay, so what was our beginning inventory?
We didn't have any beginning inventory.
No beginning inventory, so that's just going to be a 0, right? How much did we purchase?
76,400.
We purchased 76,400. What's our balance here?
Same, 76.4.
But hang on, okay? How much did we use?
Oh yeah.
Because this is going to give us our ending balance. We bought this much, but we also used a bunch, right? So our ending balance is going to be the 76. So this is going to equal this
63,400.
minus this, right? Oh, excuse me. No, I did that backwards. So just delete that out. So we use 63,450, right?
Yeah.
So our ending balance is going to be what we purchased. Put the equal sign in there, David. So what we purchased minus what we used. And that's going to be our ending balance. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And again, like I said, that number can go down here or you can just leave it there. I've done this enough times. So we'll see how you guys did on that. David, how you think you did?
I've got my Excel spreadsheet pulled up. I've got the first entry right up here at materials inventory, but after that it's incorrect all the way down.
Okay. But you showed me your work, right? So I can at least see and track your thought process?
Yeah, you should.
Okay. Because if I can see and track your thought process, then when I give you when I go to grade, say again.
It might look like one of your rabbit trails.
But if I can track your thought process, then I can when I grade your paper and I show you how I did it, you can also I'll also put notes on there and say, because sometimes pretty common mistake. One of the mistakes that was made on I did actually start grading during my lunch hour today. I did actually start grading some of the homework for this one. And one of the common mistakes, no, it was for the first set of homework. Remember when you guys were trying to figure out the haircut?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. One of the common mistakes there is people will take and they'll do their division problem, but instead of going back to the cost, so if you did 220 haircuts, to find out what your cost was for one haircut, you go to your total cost minus or divided by the 220 haircuts that you did. Well, a common mistake that folks make is instead of going back to the total cost, they go back to the revenue.
Well, I thought cost meant how much did it cost the customer, not the company.
Yeah, but we were trying to calculate cost per haircut, meaning what did it cost us to do a haircut?
Yeah.
Okay. So, but it's a common mistake. But I'll put notes on there telling you, hey, this is a common mistake. You did this, should have been this. Okay. Same thing with this kind of stuff. My goal, and this is what I told you guys right up front, is I'm going to move you from ignorance to knowledge, not ignorance as in you're stupid, but ignorance as in you're lacking knowledge. So my goal is not just to move you from ignorance to knowledge, but from knowledge to know-how. So that's the reason I always put those notes and stuff in there as I'm grading to give you guys, this is, and I will tell you, this is the point at which I normally tell everybody, the first three, if I didn't already tell you guys, the first 3 weeks of this class is always the hardest because basically what you guys are doing is learning a new language. Okay. I commonly, either of you guys Bible majors? No, you're both business or you wouldn't be in this class, okay?
Yeah.
But Dr. Nelson, do you guys know who Dr. Nelson is? Teaches Greek.
Nope.
Yeah.
Dr. Nelson, when he was teaching undergrad classes, he used to teach a class that was called Greek for non-Greek majors. Okay. Well, I always tell everybody this is the accounting class for non-accounting majors. Okay. So you guys got to bear with me. My hearing aid's trying to pop out this evening, and I don't know why. So if you see me digging at my ear, I'm not going for earwax. I'm trying to make my hearing aid stay in. Where was I? Shoot that rabbit. Like I said, you guys got a class clown for a teacher. Okay. So that was 2-3. Okay. What was the other one, David, you said?
That was the only
That
one.
was it? Okay. So other than that, I hope everything went fairly well. Like I said, I started grading a couple of homeworks during my lunch hour today. I'll try to get the rest of them graded this evening or during my lunch hour tomorrow. So you guys have the results back as quick as possible. Okay. So let me stop sharing that. And I will not save that. Don't want to save the answers for the next class. No, I don't want to go to assignments. I want to go to files and pull up my slides. I said I don't want assignments. Quit clicking the assignments button, David. Okay, week 3. Yes, I talk to myself a lot too. You should hear me when I'm in the house all by myself. If I'm not talking to myself, I'm talking to God, and we're having the same kind of conversation I have with myself. It's like, look here, stupid. Only it's God calling me stupid. Oh, sorry, guys. I was late getting home from work. Normally, I have all of this stuff open and ready to go. So I apologize this evening for taking a little longer. All right, you guys got the big purple domino?
Yep.
Okay, good to go. So, activity-based accounting. So what we're going to do now is kind of take that we did last week, and we're going to step it up a little bit. Because last week, when we were talking about costing, we were only talking about a single cost driver, right? We were talking about either labor hours or labor dollars, or we could have used machine hours, but we were only using a single cost driver, okay? Well, the reality is that in business, a lot of places have more than one cost driver. So what you have to do is calculate, you've got to have a little bit of your overhead cost is going to be driven by this piece, and a little bit of your overhead cost is going to be driven by this piece, and you got to figure all of that into the big pile. Now, you can do it with a single cost driver, but you don't have nearly as accurate of an overhead rate that you're charging, okay? So we are going to get into this today. So activity-based costing refines the indirect cost is allocated to the production. Again, it refines it because sometimes we're using 2 or 3 different drivers instead of a single driver. And you guys will see that as we get into this, especially I think I have it set up in this class where we're going to work through another problem, kind of like we did last week with the 2-23. But you're going to see where it's very important to know how to identify what the different drivers are. Okay, it focuses the cost incurred by each production activity. Okay, and by that I think about my machine shop. So in my machine shop I had a lot of different overheads. So if I went straight by labor hours, okay, it would not have given me an accurate reading. Okay. Now, I could have used labor hours when I was when I was talking about my machinists and the cost that needs to be associated in there, okay? But when I'm talking about the material handling process, then I'm talking about guys that are on forklifts and they're moving property around, okay? They're moving pallets around throughout my warehouses. Or I'm talking about the guys that was in my inspection shop, okay? And for them, my cost driver was how many pieces did they inspect? Instead of trying to do it by labor hours or labor dollars, it was how many pieces. Did I push 100 pieces through there for them to inspect, or did I push 1,000 pieces in there for them to inspect? Okay. So each activity has its own driver. So the machinists, it was labor hours. For the material handlers, it was how many pallets or how many pieces of material did they do. The inspection guys, it was straight up how many pieces of material did they inspect. So each activity in my shop had different drivers. All right. So let's kind of think about it. And I've given you a couple of the answers because I built this directly off of my stuff that I did down there. But material purchasing, okay? So material purchasing, what do you think the main driver for material purchasing is going to be? Just take a guess. Oh, you're muted, David.
The man hours required to get it where it needs to be.
Okay. Well, let's see. What did I have in there? For material purchasing, okay, the number of parts. And again, I'm thinking material purchasing, I had a guy whose job it was, and he was part of my indirect labor, but I had a guy whose job it was to go out and purchase the materials for us to make all of the parts we were making down there in that shop. Okay? So the way I did his indirect cost was, what's the number of parts that he's purchasing raw material for? All right? Material handling, we kind of talked about that already. Okay? Again, the number of parts, and it could be the number of parts, or it could be, depending on how you count stuff, it could be the number of pallets moved. But sometimes you had one part on a pallet, and sometimes you had 100 parts on a pallet. But it took the same amount of effort to move that pallet. Okay, so it kind of depended on the job we were doing as to how we counted that one. Production schedule. What do you think the cost driver for production schedule is going to be? Take a guess at it, Jacob.
Driver for production scheduling. How many different jobs you have going on and when they need people there?
Okay.
Oh, labor hours.
The labor use, the production schedule, that kind of goes back to my machine guy, my machinist. Okay. I'm pushing a certain amount of production through there. Okay. At that point, I'm not really worried about the number of parts. It's how many hours are those machinists having to put on the clock in order to drive that. Okay. Quality inspections, I already gave you that one. The number of parts that I pushed through there. Photocopies. Now I had a lady that had to print all of the specs or the plans for all of the different parts that we made in that shop. Okay, so I had a photocopying expense, and I counted that in my manufacturing overhead because my machinist had to have copies for all of that stuff in order to do their job, because they had to know all of the specific cuts and what tool had to be used to make this cut and all of those different things. Well, for the lady that was doing a photocopying, what do you think the driver for her might have been?
The quantity.
Say, okay, David, you said quantity. Jacob, what were you going to say?
I was going to say number of parts again, because she has to photocopy
Okay.
for every part.
Number of copy jobs, okay? Kind of parts, okay? Because in some cases, I may have had 10 machinists working on the same kind of part at the same time, doing a mass production. Other times, I may have only had one machinist. So in her case, I did it by the number of copy jobs. whether she was copying, making one copy or whether she was making 10 copies, it didn't matter. How many jobs was she doing? Make sense?
Think so.
Okay. And then for warranty services, it's just the number of service tickets. Okay. So kind of think IT guys. You know, how would you count the IT guys and how many tickets get phoned into them that they have to run around to different offices to go fix? Okay, I could track it. I could track every bit of this because every one of these over here is people doing stuff. Okay, so I could very easily track all of this by labor hours or all of this by labor dollars. But you notice that there's different things that drive it. Some of these number of parts, okay, but some of it is the labor used. Some of it's the number of jobs. So there's different drivers for different activities. Okay, so activity-based accounting. You have to identify each activity and estimate the total indirect cost. Same thing we did last week. Total indirect cost for doing this, whatever this is. Okay, and then identify what's the primary driver for this. Now, you notice how this is an ongoing arrow here, okay? Because you may have multiple drivers, okay? But we're going to look at one specific. So we've identified how much it's going to cost us to do. Then we have to identify the driver for that. And we have to estimate how many times, what's the quantity of each of those drivers. So let's go back to the material handlers, okay? So in this case, the material handling is my activity, okay? And I have to estimate the total cost. Well, I had two guys driving a forklift, and I paid them, I don't remember what I paid them. I think I paid them $12 an hour, maybe $15 an hour. But they worked 2,000 hours a year, okay? So I could figure out what my cost was per month or per quarter. In my case, in a machine shop, I always did it by month. Just simply because things were so volatile and they changed so much, I needed to know what my numbers were right now. So I've got material handlers, okay? So I had to figure out what my cost was or how much do I pay them per month, okay? So then I've got to identify what my cost driver is. In this case, I counted the number of parts that they moved, okay? Well, how many parts were they going to move over the course of the month? Okay, so we have to then compute the cost allocation rate for that activity. Remember, it's the total cost divided by the number of times that we do it, gives us the cost for one. Make sense? You guys still tracking with me? Okay, so then we apply it to, okay, so how many pieces came out on the other end? So we've got our activity, our driver, we have our activity. We have our driver. We've done the math. We know how much it costs us to do one. So we take that number and multiply it by how many did we actually do. I know it sounds real simple when we're in a chart like this. It's not quite as simple when you're trying to do the homework, is it? So cost allocation rate. The total estimated cost for this driver divided by the total number of times you're going to do that, whatever that is. This is just simply the same thing. So we're going to estimate material handling at $6,000. That's what my material handlers cost me for a month. Okay? Estimated number of parts. We're going to estimate that we're making 2,000 parts, or they're going to move 2,000 parts through the course of that month. Going to cost me $2 per part to pay the material handlers to be able to drive a forklift. Now, you think that seems a bit expensive, somewhat, doesn't it? And I'm paying them $6,000 and they're only moving 2,000 parts. But trust me, when one of those parts that they're moving is worth $180,000, you want them to move it nice and gingerly. Because if they hit a bump and they drop it off that pallet onto the concrete and mess it up, you just lost $180,000. So I paid those guys fairly well because I wanted them to do a good job. All right, you tracking with that so far, though? Okay. Estimated material handling. It's going to cost me $6,000 to pay my material handling. We're gonna do 2,000 parts, so it's $2 per part. Okay. So allocating indirect costs. Now those were direct costs, right? No, they weren't. Why would I say that? So allocated activity cost. So this is exercise 3-14 in the book. So pull your book out and let's look at exercise 3-14.
I don't have my book right here. Do I need to find it for this? Or
That's fine. Just kind of follow along. This
All right.
chart represents a chart that's in the book. Okay? So the chart that's in the book, it's 6,000. This is the same one that we just did. $6,000 for material handling. In this case, the number of parts that we're doing is 3,000. So what would my cost allocation out here be? No, that is the same thing we just did, isn't it?
yeah, $2.
Yeah. So it's $2 per. Okay. So now I've got machine setups. So now I've moved from the guys that are moving the material around to the machinists that are doing machine setups. Okay. So for these 3,000 parts, we've got 3,300 different machine setups. Okay. Now, not these 3,000 parts. Number of set. We got $3,300. Sorry, been a long day. We got $3,300 in machine setups. My budgeted cost. Number of setups is 20. So it literally, to make one of these parts, it could have taken 3,300 different setups on the machine. Could be, and we've got, excuse me, $3,300 that I'm paying the machinist, and he's doing 20 setups. Okay, so do the math real quick. What's this one?
$65.
Yeah, 165.
Okay, so then my inspectors, I'm paying inspectors $5,400. Okay, they're doing the same 3,000 parts. What's my math out here?
$18.
Okay, and then the guys in the finishing, the guys that are polishing it or whatever, in order for me to be able to go out and sell it. Okay, and in their case, the finishing is direct labor hours. So I've got $80,000 in cost for finishing, and I've got 2,000 hours in labor. That's that.
40.
$40 per. Okay, you guys tracking with how that works?
Yep.
Okay, so that's the first part of 3-14, just to compute all of the, so compute the indirect manufacturing cost per bumper. Okay, in this case, this is all of the different stuff that had to be done to make a bumper. Okay, that's what this, in the book, that's what this company is doing, making a bumper. Okay, so if this is our different drivers, we've got 4 different drivers here. We're going to put that into, so it's $2 per part, 3,000 parts. This is kind of just the same chart turned around. Okay, $2 per part, 3,000 parts, $6,000. Machine setups, $165 per setup, times 20 setups is the 3,300. So you see how this chart is just, it's the same thing, just showing from a different angle. Okay, so the indirect cost per allocated to 1,000 bumpers. Okay, so this is the indirect. We made 1,000 bumpers with all of this. So we're going to add these up, and we're going to come to $143,300. Right?
Mhm.
So what's our indirect cost for one bumper?
You could just add the cost allocation rate off the left side.
No,
Say
it'd
that
be
again?
143.30.
Couldn't you?
Yeah, so if we did 1,000 bumpers, we're just gonna drop 2 zeros off of there, right?
Yeah, it's $143.30.
$143.30, actually. Yeah, drop 3 zeros off of there. There's 3 zeros there, David. Okay, so if this is our total cost, and we've broken it down by the different drivers to get our cost per element for our indirect costs, because remember, all of this is indirect stuff. Okay? Our material handlers, because he's handling 3,000 parts. Inspectors, they're inspecting 3,000 parts. Okay, and we could be charging that per part, but we figure out what a per part rate is. Okay. And the reason why you can't just simply add these numbers down to find out what it costs to do one is because you look these the total quantities to make 1,000 bumpers. We had 3,000 parts that we were dealing with here, but we only had 20 setups here. Right? We did 3,000 parts here. We figured out that it was $18 per part, but we had 3,000 parts that we were dealing with here. We had 3,000 parts here. It's $2 per part, so it's 6,500 or 6,000 out here. So if we add the indirect cost down, this is what it cost us: 143,300 divided by the 1,000 bumpers that we made. We get $143.30 per bumper. Make sense? Kind of, sort of, maybe? Okay. This is probably the heart of this week's lesson, and the part that ends up being the most confusing. Okay? Because now all we're going to do is we're going to take that and we're just going to kind of begin to apply it. Okay? So using activity-based management, ABM, to achieve target costs. Okay? So it increases our profile meeting the customer. That's garbage from the, not garbage from the book. It's stuff from the book that it sounds good when you're reading it, but did that really say anything? Using ABC, activity-based costing, to make decisions. So activity-based management is just using activity-based costing. Yeah, okay. Value engineering, okay? So reevaluating activities to reduce costs. By looking at that chart that we just did, where we identified what it cost us, to make those bumpers. If our numbers are off and we're saying, okay, it's $143.30 per bumper, but I've got to get that number down below $130 per bumper. Okay. Then that's how we as managers have to be able to look at those numbers and say, okay, well, how did they get these numbers? What part can I as a manager begin to start to modify? Okay. And you may find that you really can't modify anything, that you're already bare bones and you're doing it as cheap as you can do it. Okay. That's where you have to be able to understand that and then go back to the boss and say, hey, boss, the bottom line is I can't do it any cheaper. Now what we have to do is start looking at setting our sales price a little higher. Okay. So we know what our activity-based cost is. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take that cost model and we're going to look at a couple of different ways for figuring out pricing. Okay. So there's two ways typically that we figure out pricing, and the market will usually drive this. Okay. So target price or traditional cost base. Okay. Traditional cost base we're going to look at first, because this is what everybody typically understands and can grasp a hold of fairly easy. So we take, what does it cost us to make one of any given item? Plus, how much profit do we want to make on that item? Equals how much we have to charge for it, right? What it costs us to make it, plus what we want to make it a profit, equals what we charge our customers. Pretty simple, right?
Yeah.
All right. This is traditional. Okay. This is also, what's the term I'm looking for here? It's not coming to me. When I think of it, I'll come back to you. So target based. Sometimes you're in a market where the product or what the customer is willing to spend is going to dictate to you how much you can sell something for. Okay? So if we have our target price, let's say we're selling, I don't know, a Ford Mustang. And we know that we can sell this Ford Mustang for a certain price. Okay? And we know we want to make a certain amount of money. So if we take our target price and this time we subtract our desired profit, then that's going to tell us what we have to be able to produce that Ford Mustang for. Does that make sense? It's kind of like, it's the same problem, but we kind of stand it on its head. Over here, we start with, what's it going to cost me to make it? How much money do I want to make? That's what I sell it for. Well, some product lines, you can't tell people what you're going to sell it for. They're going to tell you what they're willing to spend for it. So then you have to know, well, how much money am I making in profit? So we take how much they're willing to spend minus how much I want to make for a profit. That means I have to be able to produce it for this much or less in order to meet these two goals. That's how using activity-based costing helps us as we do activity-based management. And that was that whole section. Just understanding that there's a couple of different ways to coming to an understanding how we come up with the method by which we're going to measure ourselves. Okay, it all comes back to, what does it cost me to do the job? But the question is, does what it's going to cost me to do the job dictate what I'm going to sell it for? Or does what I'm able to sell it for going to dictate the numbers that I have to get below in cost in order to make my profit? Okay, so just-in-time production system. So we talked about this a little bit on that first week, just-in-time management, just-in-time inventory production system. Okay, basically what we're getting at here is we want to make sure that as we move forward with whatever we're producing, we only want to produce, let me rephrase that. Most of the time, we only want to produce as much as we can sell. Because if I'm producing a whole bunch of stuff and sticking it in a warehouse and I'm not selling it, you know what that warehouse is called?
Storage?
Hey, most of the time I either get storage or finished good inventory. Okay? And it's the same thing, just, they're synonymous. But you know what I call that warehouse? The bank. Because that's where my money's sitting instead of in the bank. Okay? So ideally, we only want to produce as much as we can sell. Now, in I don't know if it's next week or the week after, but one of these times, we're going to have an exercise where we're literally going to have to calculate, well, how much do I have to produce this month in order to sell what I need to sell, but have a certain amount left over in order to start my next month? Okay, so ideally, we want to produce only as much as we're going to sell or as much as we need during that month. Understanding that if we have a little bit left over from last month, that gives us some to get started with. and then we produce what we need for the month, and then at the end of the month, we have a little bit left over to come up and start the next month with. It's a cyclical operation, okay? But we need to have enough inventory to start the month with, because our production, if I start producing something on day one, it may take me 5 days to produce it. But I may need to sell some of those same items on day 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I need to have a little bit left over from last month in order to meet my customers' needs while my production is beginning to move, and the things that I started on day 1 is coming out of production on day 5, so that on day 6 I can sell it, or maybe even sell it on day 5. So anytime you hear the term just in time, whether you're talking about inventory management, whether you're talking about production management, okay, it's buying only what we need for what we're going to produce, or producing only what we need to be able to meet our customers' needs and sell what we're selling. We don't want to have a whole bunch, we don't want to buy a whole bunch of raw material and have it sitting in a warehouse for an extended period of time. And we don't want to produce a whole bunch of stuff and have it sit in our finished goods warehouse for an extended period of time. We want our production schedule to be able to match our sales schedule. Now, the reality is, one of the things is, as good managers that we have to keep in mind is making sure that, like I was talking about, that at the end of this month, I got a little bit left over to start next month with, because our customers are constantly coming to us. This is kind of just a diagram that lays out that same thing that I was just talking about. Okay, we receive from our order from our customer, we schedule our production. Okay, we want defect-free material to be delivered from our suppliers just in time to go into production. We don't want it to be sitting there for 2 weeks. If I'm not going to start on it until 10 days from now. Basically, what we wanted to do is come in about 8 days, so that it's only there for about 2 days, as opposed to sitting there for 10 days. Okay, and then we put it into production, and we want our finished goods to come out of production just in time to go on the truck and go get delivered to our customers. Just another way of looking at the same information. Okay, so just-in-time costing. So short exercise, 3-11. Well, we're going to look at 3-11. This is just in time. So consider the following characteristics of either just-in-time production or traditional production systems. Okay? And then we're going to indicate whether this is a just-in-time or traditional. All right? So as you go down this chart, this is one I've already got filled out here for you. So production, products produced in large batches. When I was taking this class at a graduate level, Dr. Hessel always talked about, he used to work in a can factory, and they made, the little cans that you get tuna fish or cat food in. His can company made those cans. Okay, he said there's about 3 companies in the country that make them, but his company made 90% of all of them that were ever manufactured. So he was always talking about that, and then they made coffee cans, the 1-pound coffee cans that you get Folgers or Maxwell House coffee in. They made those too. So, but when you're making cans like that, you're going to make them in large batches, but you're going to sell them by the truckload. Okay, so that's a traditional method. Okay, large stock, finished goods, protect against lost sales. So anybody that's doing large stocks of finished goods, so that they have it in their warehouse, so that they don't take the chance of losing sales, traditional stuff, okay? But when your suppliers are making frequent deliveries of small quantities of material, instead of buying it in bulk all at once, so it sits there, instead of getting 1 delivery every 2 weeks, you get 4 deliveries, one about every 3 days. Okay, that's a just-in-time system where we're only bringing in enough material as we need for the production we're going to do over the next 3 or 4 or 5 days. So that's what this chart is. You just go down and you can kind of read through it and make sense of that yourself. Okay. So using 4 types of quality cost to make decisions. Okay. So total quality management, TQM. You guys are going to find that again this week we're going to be done fairly early. Part of it is because I chose not to throw quite as much into this week since I give you a homework assignment and a quiz to do this week. Okay, so I think what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and take a break here for a minute. I've got 6:52. How about we come back at about 7:05? So let's take about a 15-minute break. Come back at 7:05, and we'll finish up. And hopefully I'll have you out of here before 8 o'clock.
All right, cool.
I'm back, but it's my normal dinner time, so I'm gonna be off camera eating.
Not a problem. That's what I was doing during the break, was eating.
Yeah, I was eating it up. I'm still present though.
Okay. So, total quality management. Kind of like the just-in-time management scheme. We're just talking about different types of management schemes and how they play into all the different accounting that we do. Our goal is obviously to provide our customers with superior products or service and or service, and we're constantly trying to improve it. One of the concepts that I had a hard time getting my guys at the machine shop to understand. My guys that were the inspectors, they didn't have a problem understanding it. It was getting the guys in the machine shop, the different machinists and the other folks that were out there working, trying to get them to understand the concept of total quality management and moving from inspecting everything at the end before we ship it out, which obviously is a good thing to inspect stuff before you ship it out. Now, do you inspect every item? Well, that depends. If you're talking about one of those $180,000 parts that I was talking about a while ago, yep, every stinking one of them gets inspected, okay? But if you're talking about a widget that, costs $5.80 or even $50.80, okay? And you're making 3,000 of them, well, maybe you're only going to inspect 10% of them, okay? And you randomly pick 10% of them to inspect. And if all those are good, then you make an assumption that the rest of them are good. Okay. And that's the way things were doing. They would get over, everything would be done, and it would get over to the inspection shop, and the inspectors would inspect it. And sometimes everything was good, and sometimes they'd have to kick it back. Well, if you're talking about an $180,000 part, and you wait till the very end to find out that somebody on step, mind you, this $180,000 part had about 435 steps to it. Okay. And we had 3 of them that we had to basically throw away. And the reason that we had to throw them away was one of the guys on step 7 had misread the directions, misread the plans, and was making a cut too deep. Well, had I had my total quality management in place at the time, we would have caught that at step 10, because ultimately what we ended up doing was we had an inspector that was floating around in the shop, and we had it set up so that every 5 steps in the process that this piece had to go through, before it could go from step 10 to step 11, it had to be inspected. And the reason for that is a lot of the cost, not just the material that was in that part, but a lot of the cost in making that part. The reason it cost $180,000. Now we sold it for like $300,000, but the reason it cost $180,000 to make was there was one step in that process that was a 24-hour step. It took 3 machinists to get this thing up and in place, and everything had to be measured. And literally the reason it took 3 machinists to get it up in place is because before we would let them start that process, all 3 of the machinists had to validate that everything was set up correctly in that machine. Because once you hit go on that machine, it's going to run for 24 hours. And if you don't have it set up right, you just ruin that piece of material. Well, there was times when that piece of material was ruined before it ever got to them. Well, I don't want to put the cost and expense of 3 machinists working on this part and then that machine running for a day if it's already junked because somebody 3 steps earlier messed it up. So that's where the total quality management comes in. You're always looking to improve your processes. And that's what I did when I got to this machine shop, was we started putting into the process, we started putting in-process inspections. And by doing that, we were able to catch some mistakes early. Now, we still had to throw the material away, but instead of it costing me $180,000 because we had been through all of the steps, it only cost me $18,000 because I was only throwing the material and the labor involved in those first 7 steps. Actually, the first 10 steps. The guy on step 7 is the one that was making the mistake, and after the first one got messed up, we started doing every 10, and then, so we caught it at number 10. And then I pulled everybody together and I said, guys, we can't afford to do this. We all going to be out of a job real quick. We do very many of these things because the boss is going to send us packing, you know? And so between my inspectors and my machinist, we came up with a plan that every 5 stations, after it was done with station 5, before it went to 6, it got inspected to make sure all of those first 5 steps were done and done correct. And this thing was big enough, instead of us bringing it to the inspectors, we brought the inspector to the part. You know, I'm doing this with my hands, but the reality is this thing was a piece of metal that was 12 feet long.
Oh, dang.
And it was about 31 inches around when it went as raw material. Now, it only ended up being 18 inches around by the time we were done. But as raw material, it was 32 inches around. And we had to have that much because in one spot it would be 18 inches, and another spot it would be 22 inches, and another spot it would be 12 inches, and another spot. So it was doing this because other pieces would attach to it in different places. It was crazy. But so you understand the concept where I'm going there with total quality management. And it's not just in inspections. There's a lot of other things we can put in place in that management process. Okay, so let's see. What other chart did I have here? Okay, so prevention. Okay, when we start talking about costs, here's what we're looking for. So in my case, when we were doing the total quality management, we were trying to prevent waste. The way we were preventing waste was that we were doing appraisals or we were doing inspections along the way. But ultimately, if it was going to be a failure, we wanted it to be an internal failure. That makes sense? We wanted it to fail, and we wanted to catch it before it ever left our shop. Because if we hadn't caught that mistake, and it was an internal mistake, so anybody looking at the part, it looks right. But as soon as you put it down as soon as you hook it up to the drill and you run it down 1,800 feet down in the ground and you tried to get that part to turn, it wouldn't turn. It would lock because the pieces that were supposed to be able to do this, the pieces went, and they could only bend so far. They couldn't bend far enough because one cut on the thing was made wrong. It was cut too deep, which allowed the parts to shift and would lock. We found that internally. It would have been really bad if we'd have sold that part to somebody, sold that part to Exxon, and Exxon had pushed that part out there, and they're out there in the middle of the Gulf trying to drill, and they've run this thing 1,800 feet down, and now they've got to pull this thing back out because it's not working. And hopefully they've got another one over here that they can put back on and go right back down in the hole. Because if they don't have another one, now they're sitting there doing this. And those rigs cost, this is what I was told. I'm not an oil man. Okay, I'm a supply guru. But I was told that when those rigs sit idle, it costs about $6 million an hour.
Damn.
Setting idle. Yeah, that's what I said too. Between the money that the guy that owns that rig is paying in interests and all of the other things that have to happen, the labor he's paying those guys that are on that rig, even if that rig's not drilling, because they're getting paid whether they can drill or not. You know, so it was that's what I was told. Don't know that that's 100% accurate, but that's what I was told, that it was about $6 million an hour when that thing sits idle. That's why we would preach to our guys, don't mess up, because if your mistake caused that rig to set idle, there's a problem.
Yeah.
And our customer's not going to be happy. So, but you will have external failures, so you have to be prepared. And a lot of times we had an engineer that worked in our shop, and we had a machinist that worked in our shop. And if something failed, I mean, some parts you expect to fail just by the nature of the job. That's why I said, they pull that piece out and set it off to the side. And hopefully they had another one over here, because those pieces eventually fail.
Yeah.
It's mechanical. Eventually it's going to fail. So the question is, did it fail when it was supposed to? You're supposed to get this many hours worth of use out of it, or this many feet of drilling out of it. Did it fail when it was supposed to, or did it fail prematurely? And if it failed prematurely, it was not uncommon for me to have, an engineer and a machinist get on a helicopter and fly out to one of them rigs out in the Gulf, so that they're out there watching what's happening, so that when they bring that part then back and we go to disassemble it and figure out what happened, and we do our failure analysis, we can figure out, what was going on. Why did it fail when it failed? There was times when, when our analysis was that, look, we made it exactly like you guys said it needed to be made. But the problem was you picked a metal that was too brittle. And most people don't think about different metals being brittle or flexible or having tensile strength. But metal's got all kinds of goofy,
Yeah.
really, really goofy things that we have to, does it have enough copper in it? Does it have enough iron in it? Does it have enough zinc in it? Does it, all of those things get measured, so we bought it. We flat out told them, look, if you're going to continue to go with this metal, it has to be this metal with this tensile strength. Problem is your tensile strength is too high, making the metal too brittle. So when you're trying to make it do this function, it's failing. So, but when you have external failures, one, you don't ever want to tell their customers that they're idiots or they're wrong, or the customer's always right. But sometimes you have to be able to go out and show the customer that, look, we gave you what you asked for. The problem is what you asked for isn't what you want. And you got to be able to do that in a manner that they still come back to you and buy the part again. Okay, so that's the end of this chapter. David, you are still with us, right? Just unmute and tell me you're there.
I'm here.
Okay, so I'm fixing to play a video, and again, hopefully this thing plays right. Jacob, since you're on camera, what I need you to do once it starts playing is I need you to give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down if you hear the audio correctly.
Okay.
Okay? So I'm going to click this. Okay, are you guys seeing the video coming up?
No, I'm not.
Negative.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to have to stop sharing and start again. So let me hit the skip and the pause. And I'm going to stop sharing. Oh, I didn't start sharing when we came back from break, did I?
No. You just
No.
Oh, well, you only missed one slide, so don't worry about it.
Okay.
I didn't realize I forgot to start
I
sharing
understood
when we came
everything
back
you
from
were
break.
saying, so.
Okay, so now do you guys see a black screen that says activity-based costing at the top?
I do not, no.
Negative.
Okay, let's hit this again. How about now?
There we go.
No, I do.
Okay. See, user error. Eventually, I'll hit the right button. Okay. So this is about a 23. Well, it says 23 minutes and 38 seconds. So it's about a 23-minute video, and basically, it's going to go over the stuff that we went over today, the activity-based costing, where we're going to talk about different activities and how it all wraps up. Only this time, instead of listening to me, you're going to listen to. I used to know this guy's name, and for the life of me right now, I'm drawing a blank on what his name is. Anyway, you're gonna hear a few of his videos throughout this course, because he he does a very good job of taking the same information I'm trying to explain and explain it. Sometimes it's better if you just hear it from somebody else. But every time he does it, he also applies real numbers to it, real world, problems to it. Okay. So we're going to listen to him for about the next 20 minutes. And then when he's done, then we'll come back together and we'll talk about it before we call it a night. Okay.
I'm going to talk about activity-based costing, which is sometimes
Can you hear
abbreviated
that?
as ABC.
Yes.
With ABC, what we're looking at is non-direct costs. So when I say non-direct
Okay, I'm
costs,
gonna mute.
what
I'm
we're
gonna mute
ruling
and turn my
out,
camera
what
off
we're
so you
not
guys.
thinking
I'm not
about,
in your way.
is things like direct materials, direct labor. And the reason is that we can easily trace these costs to a product, to a division. It's not difficult for us to do that because they're direct costs. But when we think about non-direct costs, things that aren't as easily traceable, we basically come up with ways to try and allocate that overhead to products. And what we usually use are things like the number of machine hours or the number of labor hours. And we basically use these as proxies, as drivers of all of our non-direct costs. And we'll just say in general, we'll just talk about, let's say, our overhead. So when we think about our overhead, let's say we have $500,000 in overhead, we just say, okay, well, how many labor hours did we have? And then we'll just divide that into this overhead figure. That'll give us an amount, a rate. That's our cost driver. And then we just go ahead and apply that to basically come up with ways to cost things out and to kind of get into these non-direct costs. Now, activity-based costing in that sense is no different. That it's not, we're not getting into these direct costs. We're still trying to kind of allocate costs. And activity-based costing is basically a different, more precise way of doing it than just simply looking at machine hours or labor hours. So it's more precise, but it also takes more information. It's actually more difficult to implement. So let's just jump into an example. So let's say in our example here that you've got a firm that is going to manufacture two products. So we've got two products, and let's say that these product lines, let's say you are really into the outdoors and hiking, and so you're going to make hiking packs. It's like the backpack that a hiker would wear, and then you will make tents. Those are the two things that you're going to make. So when we think about, okay, how will we go about implementing an ABC system? Let's say previously you used machine hours or something like that. That looks terrible. And now you want to use ABC. So first thing we need to do, and we can just think of this in terms of steps if you want, the first thing we need to do is identify kind of the activities that we're looking at, the activities that we're trying to allocate. And in this case, just to kind of make the example easier, I'm just going to say that what we're trying to allocate or spread out, we're just going to call it overhead. Now, I could get into the specifics of this type of overhead and say, okay, this has to do with some equipment depreciation. It has to do with the janitor's salary. It has to do with these other things that have to do with the warehouse. And we could even say, okay, well, we're going to have manufacturing overhead, and then we're also just going to kind of have a separate thing where instead of this overhead, we also have another category of SG&A expenses. You can do whatever you want. Remember, this is we're doing costing, and this isn't for external reports. This is just to produce useful information for managers to make decisions. So you can have costs that aren't seen as typical overhead costs, like your SG&A or customer support costs, in this figure, or you can break it out separately. Now, I'm just going to lump it all here to make it easier for you to understand how to do activity-based costing. So let's say that we took a look and we said, well, you know what? We've got, in terms of our overhead, we've got $1 million. That's what we're looking at. This is manufacturing overhead, some of the SG&A costs. We just lumped it all and we say overhead is $1 million. That's what we're dealing with. So what we want to do is now we've kind of got our activity here or what it is that we're going to be trying to spread across these different products here, our tents and our hiking packs. And so now we can say, okay, well, let's put this into cost pools. Let's take this $1 million and let's put it into different pools. So what these cost pools are, let me just change colors here. So let's say here, I'll just put cost pools, is our heading. It's basically, these are categories that kind of comprise, well, how was this $1 million spent? And we'll say that some of it was spent on assembly. Some of it was spent on putting together the hiking packs, putting together the tents. We had to assemble those items before we could ship them out. And so we said that assembly is going to be one of these cost pools. Now, when you say, hey, we've got a cost pool here, you also need to say, okay, well, how would we measure that cost pool? How will we say that, okay, we're incurring some of that cost? Like what's a good driver for the assembly cost? And we'll just say, okay, our measure, let's put that over here. Our measure of this activity, of this cost object here, we'll say that it's going to be the number of units produced. Number of units produced. And here's a way to think about this is say, okay, if we produce more units, if we produce more tents, then we're going to incur more manufacturing overhead, or we'll just say general overhead related to the assembly function. All right. So some of this $1 million is going to come down here and go into this cost pool. We don't know how much yet. We're going to get into that. Let's just finish going through our cost pools. So our second cost pool, let's say it's processing orders. Now you say, well, if you're asking yourself, where do we even come up with these cost pools? Where are you getting this? Well, this is something that's different to every organization. And so one organization might say, well, you know what, really, this is trivial. We don't need to deal with that. So it's specific to the organization, and we're just saying we've spoken with the managers, and these are the cost pools they feel are most relevant. So we say processing orders, and then the measure, what drives the processing orders? Well, the number of orders. Right? So if all else equal, if we have more orders, we're going to incur more cost related to processing those orders. So that kind of makes sense, and we just work our way through and say the next thing, let's say there's customer support is a cost pool. And you say, well, what is customer support? What are you talking about? Well, when you sell a product, you'll often have people complain about the quality, and then they have to talk to somebody. Maybe there was a part that was defective, and they call and get support staff. There's any number of reasons that a firm is going to incur costs relative to this customer support. And a good way of saying, okay, well, what's a measure for customer support? What might be something that drives it? Well, we can say the number of customers. So the more customers we have, the more people we might have, or companies we might have, calling us saying, hey, you know what, I'm not really happy with these tents that I received, and so forth. So another cost pool, which is quite common, is just to have a pool called other. Now with other, we're not going to have any measure. Basically, other is just saying, okay, these are things that we actually call them, there's a phrase for them. Some people call them organization sustaining activities. This might be something like, for example, let's say the lease on the factory, right? So we've got a lease on the factory to produce our tents and our hiking packs. And we say, you know what, that really doesn't fall into any of these cost pools. And we really don't even want to be assigning it to either the hiking pack division or the tent division anyways, because realistically, if we got rid of one of those products, we're still going to need the factory, right? So we just say, okay, well, we really just going to dump this in this other category because we don't really want to spread that cost. We just really want to be looking at these cost pools right here. This is what we feel is the best basis of comparison. So now that we've got our cost pools, what we need to do is say, okay, well, we need to take this $1 million and we need to spread it throughout these cost pools, right? So assembly is going to get some, processing is going to get some, customer support, and then they're all going to get some. And we say, well, how do we know, how do we go ahead and do that? Well, and again, this, you think about it in terms of steps, this would be step 2, is now we assign that overhead to these cost pools, and we're going to do it by estimating a percentage of this overhead that relates to each one of these functions. Each one of these cost pools. Now, how do you figure that out? Well, you're going to do interviews. You're going to do interviews with maybe some of the factory workers, and you say, okay, how much of your time, what % of your time would you say you end up dealing with assembly or with, you start thinking about the overhead and say, okay, what, is this 90% of this has to do with assembly, or is it 90% has to do with customer support? So you interview your staff, and this is where kind of the subjective nature of ABC system comes into play. But ultimately, you interview people and you find out, and you say, okay, wait a minute, we've done a lot of checking. And we think, okay, let me just write this out here. Let's say you say, okay, you know what, 50% of this we estimate has to do with assembly, right? So 50% has to do with assembly, and then let's say 10% has to do with processing, and then let's say you estimate 25% has to do, has to do with customer support, and then 15% has to do with other. That's the lease on the factory or something. So I'm actually, I know this looks terrible penmanship here, so let me just scroll down and we'll make this a little better. So let's say here, we'll just write that. So we've got assembly. So now we need to, so we've got, here's our pool. I'll just put pool. And now we'll say the cost. We need to know the cost that is going to end up in this cost pool. I'll just call it cost pool. And then the cost that is going to end up here, right here. We need to know that. So what we do is we say, okay, well, we've got 50% goes to assembly, and then we've got $1 million. So 50% of $1 million is $500,000, right? So then we take $500,000 and put it here in the assembly, right? That's just saying that of that overhead, that big bucket, we're going to dump it into a smaller bucket here and say, okay, assembly. Now, I'm just going to bring with us our activity measure. If you remember that we said that we had, we're going to look at the number of units. We're going to say we're going to, here, let me just, I'll scroll back up for you to see that. Where did we have it? Oh, it's right here. Okay, so we said we're going to measure this with the number of units for assembly. So now I'll just bring that down. And now we say, okay, well, as we're doing this, we'll just say, well, how many units are we budgeting for this year? How many units are we expecting to sell? Well, let's say it's 20,000. So we'll just collapse this all into one step. We've got our cost pool over here, assembly. We're saying, okay, of that million of overhead, 50% or 500,000 belongs with assembly, and we're expecting 20,000 units that we're actually going to assemble. So why I've got all that will become important in a minute. Let me just figure out what we've got for the next one, which is processing. So we'll say here we've got processing. Now we need to know the cost for processing, right? So we say, well, we've got 10% of that million, right? Remember that million right here. Say 10% applies to processing. So that's going to be $100,000. So I put 100,000 here. Now remember, processing, we say it's based on the number of orders. Well, how many orders are we expecting? Okay, well, we talked to the sales department. We talked to somebody. And they said, well, we're expecting 1,000 orders. So then we put in 1,000 orders, right? So next up is our customer support. So we'll just call this support. And we need to know the cost for this. So we say, okay, it's 25% that we estimated of that million, right? So that means that we're going to have 250,000 gets dumped in the support bucket, right? Now we add the number of customers was our measure for support. So we're going to, let's say that we have 200 customers. We're expecting to have 200 customers. And then in our other category, that's just 15% of that million. Let me scroll down a bit. So other is going to be 150,000. And here we don't have an activity because it's just, we're not measuring it. We're just saying it, we actually don't want to consider it. So now if you add all this up, you're going to get to a million, right? So we basically just took that million and we spread it across these cost pools, right? That's all we did here. So now let's go down. And now if you notice that, okay, we've got our cost pool, we've got the cost, and we've got the activity, what we can do is a really convenient thing, which we can just say, okay, let's take the total cost and divide it by the number of units or the number of orders, customers. For each one, it's different, but you get the idea. We're taking this column and dividing it by here. So, and that'll give us our rate, We'll just call that our activity rate. Okay, so let me change up here so we don't keep having the same. So we take the 500,000, divide it by 20,000 units, and that's going to give us $25 a unit. $25 a unit. Okay. Now we take the 100,000, the processing costs, and divide it by 1,000 orders. And that's going to give us $100 an order. Okay. Now we take the 250,000 support costs, divide it by the 200 customers that we're expecting to have. And that's going to give $1,250 in cost per customer. And again, we don't have a rate for other because we're not even gonna consider that with our ABC system. So what we really got here, if you notice, we've got 3 rates, right? Now this isn't all that different from before when we used to do we take our machine hours and our labor hours, and divide that into our manufacturing overhead and get some kind of plant-wide overhead rate. But now what we're doing is we're saying, hey, there's really a lot that's driving that overhead. You know, we've got some assembly going on here. We've got processing the orders. We've got some customer support. And really, we don't want to just take one rate for the whole plant and just say that's going to tell us about overhead. We've got 3 different rates here, right? So it's going to allow us to be more precise when we're actually pinning down of that $1 million in that overhead bucket, what applies to tents, and what applies to our hiking packs. So now that we've got these rates, we can do a lot of things with that. Right now, what I'm just going to do is I'm actually going to break it out by hiking packs and by tents. Right. So let me change colors here again. How about purple? Okay, so let's say that, and we'll just, if we think of this in terms of steps, we started in step 1, we define what our activities were, the cost pools, the measures, and then step 2, we assign the overhead to cost pools based on, employee interviews, talking with people. Then we calculated the rates, right? That was the last thing we did, and now we can use those rates to assign overhead to cost objects. So let's say we want to know the costs for the hiking packs division or product line, and then we've got the tents product line. So we say, let's just assume that we say, okay, well, we sell 10,000 units of hiking packs, and we're going to sell 10,000 tents. So 10,000 of each, right? So now this is actually going to be pretty simple. So this is now the reason I put so units here, we're actually going to think of first our assembly, right? So actually let me write that down here. If you can see that, assembly be our first one. I should have put that in there, my apologies. So 10,000 units, what is that going to lead to in cost? Well, we have that $25 a unit. So for each of these, it's going to be $250,000. Let me change again. So $250,000 is the cost when we look at there, 250,000. We have 10,000 units of tents, 10,000 units of hiking packs, and so that's going to lead. Basically, we're splitting this 500,000 is going to end up going half over here and then half over here with the tents. And another way of looking at it is just that $25 a unit. So we're producing the same amount of units for each. But now let's make things a little bit more interesting. So now let's get into the processing. So even though they have the same number of units, let's just say that when we look at the processing, remember it's the number of orders. Well, let's say that we have 700 orders for hiking packs, and then we only have 300 orders for tents. Okay, so now we take this rate that we calculated and we multiply it by the number of orders. So it's $100 an order, right? So we take 700 times $100, and that's going to give us 70,000. Now over here, we take the 300 orders times $100 an order, That's going to give us 30,000. Okay. Now we can go and say, well, we need to look at support next. So we'll take the customer support, and remember that the number of customers was what we looked at as our measure there. So let's say that we have 150 customers buying things for our hiking packs. So that's 150. And then we have 50 customers for our tents. And now we can go ahead and look at the cost, and we say, well, it's $1,250 a customer. That's our rate. So 1,250 times 150, that's going to give us 187,500. And now that 1,250 times 50 customers is going to give us 62,500. Now again, we don't worry about the other, because we're not trying to assign that cost to the hiking packs or to the tent division. We're actually going to ignore that. We don't believe that that's relevant. So now we can add up the costs for each of these divisions. So we say, let me change colors again. So I believe we've got 507,500 here. And then over here, we're going to have 342,500. That's our total cost. Now, again, remember, these costs do not include direct materials, direct labor, right? So you don't want to base your entire decision and say, oh, well, we want to get rid of this one product line or something just simply because of this. This is one input into the cost of the hiking packs and the tents. So when we think about this, we think, okay, well, what's going on here? We have the same number of units for each one, but we end up with these different cost totals. And it looks like that we say, okay, well, our hiking packs, they're being ordered more frequently and by a larger number of customers. So basically, because of that, because we have more customers who decide maybe they're making smaller orders instead of one large order, because of that, it's actually costing us more money, even though, see, we're costing us over $150,000 more in terms of that overhead bucket, because even though we're doing the same number of units, because of this discrepancy between 700 orders here, 300. So basically, the tents, even though it's the same number of units, it's a lot less hassle in terms of these two items, and so it's actually costing us less when we just look at that overhead bucket. Now, another thing to think about is if you take this number and add them together, it does not equal $1 million. And you might say, hey, that's weird. Why is that not equal $1 million? Because remember, we started with $1 million in that overhead bucket. Well, the reason is that we didn't want to account for that other, right? That lease on the or on the factory or whatever it was. So that's okay that these two numbers do not equal that number right there. So that's fine. And so ABC, important takeaway is that ABC is nice, that it helps us kind of get a better idea of what the specific costs and cost drivers are for the hiking packs divisions and the tent division, instead of just lumping the $1 million into just one big bucket and just saying, okay, we're going to come up, look at the number of machine hours, and then just take one plant-wide overhead rate and just apply that to the entire both divisions. We're instead taking multiple rates based on these different cost pools that we identified by talking with our employees to see what is really driving the costs that are in that million. And then we identified those rates, and then we apply them to get our total cost for the hiking packs and the tent division. And then we can go ahead and look at our direct costs, direct materials and direct labor, put that together with these costs, and then we really have an accurate view of what the cost is for each division.
So, question: did it help any having him go through the chalkboard there and work it out for you?
It did help, but my question is, what if the tents cost more to process than the backpacks per individual unit? Then that throws the whole thing off.
Well, no, it's not necessarily going to throw everything. Because remember, what we're talking about here is only overhead. Okay?
Oh, so you don't
It's
know how
only
much.
overhead. It's not talking about the direct labor to assemble the tents and it's not talking about the direct materials that's involved. Okay? So it looks like the backpacks cost more than the tents. But now when you start talking about how much labor does it take to put a backpack together versus how much labor does it take to put a tent together? How much material does it take to put a backpack together versus how much? So this is just the overhead cost.
Okay, that makes sense.
It's only one piece of the equation when you start looking at the whole overall product. Okay, so let me come over here and hit escape. So what I have started doing, I didn't mean to do all of that. I hit the wrong button again. Give me a second to get my canvas open back up. What I've started doing is kind of walking through. Obviously I'm not going to work the problems for you, but I've kind of started walking through the homework so that you guys understand what I'm looking for. So give me a second to get the homework pulled back up here. Accounting. Assignments. Assignment number 3. Okay, just about got it up. Okay, so let me start sharing here again. All right, you guys see the spreadsheet there?
Yep.
Mhm.
Okay, and again, let me look. I don't think there's anything on the questions tab, anything on the problems tab. No, okay. So I've cleaned this one up. Everything is on the exercise tab. Okay. So again, questions like we've had before, activity based. Okay. Rank the following steps in order in which they would be completed. So you guys kind of go through there and figure out what order would they be done in. Okay. So activity based, okay? In this case, the story problem kind of does it for you. It estimates your cost for what food is, for what skiing is, and for what lodging is. Okay? So that cost pool that the guy was talking about on the video, there's your cost pool. Okay, well, the driver, pounds of food eaten, okay? Well, Blake doesn't eat as much as Roscoe does. Skiing, well, Blake's going to go skiing, but Roscoe's staying in the lodge. That's the reason Roscoe eats more, by the way. He's in the lodge eating while Blake's out skiing. Okay, so you guys got to kind of work through this problem. You're going to build, but what you're going to do is you're going to figure out what the cost is for Blake and what the cost is for Roscoe. So if you need to add some more lines down here, you guys remember how to add lines in there to give yourself some more space if you need to, right? So you're going to figure out. So the first thing you're going to is if they share all the cost evenly, okay? And then you're going to break it out and figure out if they depending on what the cost drivers are. This is the one. Wait a minute. Is this? Yeah. This is the one that tricks most people up, gives most people the biggest problem. Okay. What you got to do is you got to remember when you're going through here is because you got to read the book. I did not type all of this out. There's a whole lot of information in the book, so you got to read the book on this one. Okay. But here's the information that they're giving you, and there is a typo in this one. See where that says 26? It should be 25 because it's 50 total. Well, you can't have 25 and 26 and get 50. So that was a typo on my part.
You can in public school.
What's that?
You can in public school.
Yeah, you probably can. Okay. But when you're going through, just slow down and make sure you listen to what they're asking you. Okay. And one of the things you've got to do is you've got to figure out what is the cost for one setup? What is the cost for one machine hour? Because down here, you're going to apply a certain number of setups for the low gain, and you're going to apply a certain number of machine hours for. So you got to figure out what it's going to cost you to do one setup, or what one machine hour is. Okay, so you got to follow that through. Now, this is what messes people up. Okay, so this is what we've been doing this week. ABC. So the requirement number 2 is compute the indirect manufacturing cost using one. So basically, we're going to go back to what we did last week. Okay, you're going to use one cost driver, and it says you're going to use labor hours. Okay, well, in the story problem and the information they've given you, they tell you how many labor hours there is. Okay, so this is doing it with just one driver. This requirement 1 is doing it with multiple drivers. Okay. So, and a lot of people, like, they get confused on this one. This is just, and the reason for that is what we're going to do is next week, we're going to go back and look at the homework, and we're going to compare 1 and 2 and talk about why they're different. That's going to kind of, next week, as we get started doing class like we did today, where we went over 2-3, next week, we're going to go over this problem. Okay. So, and that'll give you a bit of a heads up on that. So that was assignment 3. Now remember, this week you got 2 homework pieces. You got the homework for week 3, which is when you go into assignments, it's assignment 3. Okay. But you also have week 3 quiz over chapters 1, 2, and 3. Now, do the homework assignment for chapter 3 first. It will help. Okay? But when you go into the quiz, oh, it'd help if I hit the button down there. I'm like, why isn't it opening? Because you didn't hit the button, Goofy. Okay, so down here, make sure you look at this. There's 2 tabs down here, questions. So kind of like the beginning questions that we've had for the homework assignments for the first 3 weeks. There's some beginning questions here, okay? You got to just answer A, B, C, D for the first few questions. And then exercises, then there's a couple exercises here. And if you look, P1-36 coming right out of the book. Every exercise we do, every problem we do comes right out of the book. So this goes back to chapter 1. Okay? 2-37 goes back to chapter 2. And I didn't give you one from chapter 3 because trust me, that the one with the antennas, that trips people up enough on chapter 3 that I didn't put a big problem for chapter 3 on this one. Because you're already going to be doing a big problem for chapter 3 anyway. Okay? So
How long should this take?
Say again?
How long should this take?
Assuming that you're comfortable with the information, you should be able to do this quiz in about 30 to 45 minutes.
Okay.
Okay? If you're not as comfortable, the front part of it will go real quick. If you're not quite as comfortable, these problems may take you a little longer. So it could take you an hour to an hour and a half, depending on how comfortable you are with the material. Okay? I will tell you, doing the homework, typically, that last, now, I'm the professor and I've done it enough times, so I can get through that last problem in a matter of about 10 minutes. But most people tell me that they spend anywhere from 30 to 40 minutes working that last problem for the assignment for chapter 3. Okay? So take that as it is. So between the homework assignment and then the quiz, you've got about an hour and a half or so worth of work that you're going to have to get done. All right? I know, I'm a softie, right? I give you guys easy stuff. It's just numbers.
I normally spend about the same amount of time fighting Excel as I do actually.
Excel don't want to work for you?
No.
Oh, trust me, I'm at my office. The IT guys. Well, the IT guys didn't do it. Microsoft did, but they did updates to our Excel this week. And this morning, I kid you not, I clicked on to open up Excel. I clicked on it. I got up from my desk, went out, made me a cup of coffee, came back to my desk and sat down, and it still wasn't done opening. Now, once it gets open, it runs just fine. But it takes it like 10 minutes to open. I called the IT guys and I said, look, guys, you either got to fix this or you got to put me back on a version that's not updated. Because this ain't going to work. So I understand, especially this week, I understand your difficulties with Excel not wanting to work right. Are you on an Apple or are you on a Mac?
Matt or
Android, Windows,
yeah.
Microsoft machine, something other than Apple. Because what I find a lot of times is when people have apples, that they'll have some problem. That's another thing that I didn't mention. Apparently, everybody has not had a problem this time because they haven't had any issues with it. But if you're in any of your classes, if you have Apple machines, okay, whether it's a Mac Pro or whatever, the Apple OIS. No, is that right? OIS?
iOS.
Yeah. iOS. Yeah, the Apple iOS has problems. Our Canvas has problems with the Apple iOS. That's why we always tell everybody, go up and see IT and get Aaron or Daniel or one of them up there to give you a hand and download Windows for Apple. Because what happens if you try to turn it in, a Word document in or an Excel document in, the extension on it ends up being .pages instead of .docs or .xl. It ends up being .pages, and Canvas can't read .pages.
Yeah, I'm on a relatively new Dell, so it's already all Windows.
So why are you having trouble with Excel?
That's a good question.
Is it you're having problems with Excel, the application, or is it that you're having problems with Excel and you moving around within it?
Me moving around within it.
Ah, okay. Well, if you have a lot of problems with that, give me a shout, and we can get on to do a one-on-one Teams, and I maybe can help you out a little bit.
Okay, one question. Every time I click on a cell that has something in it, it completely clears the cell blank. Why is it doing that, and is it supposed to?
No, it's not supposed to. And what I'd have to get you to do is, we'll have to work through it one-on-one because it should not be doing that.
Okay. That gets real old when you go to edit a number or something and it just clears your formula.
Yes, trust me. I can understand that. I haven't had that problem, but I can understand that. So, Jacob, do you have any problems?
So far I haven't, no.
Okay. And for any of you out there, if you're having problems with Excel, or if you're having problems with the homework, I'm happy to get on and do a one-on-one session with you. You need to send me an email, and I try to do a pretty good job of staying up on the emails. And David, I apologize for not getting back with you on the one for this last week, but I try to do a pretty good job of staying up on the emails and I work from 8 to 5, so it'll have to be an evening time when we get together. And I might be able to do it over a lunch hour from my office, but as long as I know and I can take my laptop in, because I try not to do Calvary business on Texas A&M's computer. Not that my boss would complain, but I work for Texas A&M now. So anyway, if you guys don't have any questions, I'm going to go ahead and close this out. You guys have a good night. And like I said, David, if you're having problems, give me a shout, and we'll see if we can help you out.
All right, I'll see how this next homework goes. I don't want to end up fighting with that on the test.
All right, sounds good. Night,
See you next
fellas.
week.